The book of Proverbs gives us a vision of the paths to life and death, represented by the image of two women. One is named Lady Wisdom. She leads all who will listen to her words down the path of life. The other is named Lady Folly. Her lies are calling people off wisdom's path to come and die. And this should remind us of the beginning of the Bible, how in the book of Genesis, God in his wisdom created a garden and put two trees within it. One was the tree of life, which had fruit that would keep you near God and eternally alive. The other was the tree of knowledge, which had fruit that was desirable to the eyes and even promised to make you wise, but in the end, its fruit would only cause you to die. The first to face this paradigm were Adam and Eve, who were told to let God's wisdom define what is wrong and what is right, to trust wisdom's voice, to listen to wisdom's words, so that thereby they too would become wise. Through wisdom, they would live with God and eat from the tree of life. But there was another voice in the garden by the tree of knowledge that did not speak wisdom, but spoke lies. It was the voice of the serpent that called the gardeners aside and taught them to question the voice of wisdom, taught them to listen to their own truth, to define their own versions of wrong and right. And this was the voice of sin, the voice of the enemy. This was the voice of Lady Folly. Adam and Eve turned their backs on God, on wisdom, and therefore on life. They turned toward folly, toward sin, which opened up the door for them to die. So they were separated from God, who is the source of life. They were separated from the tree that would keep them alive. The point of Proverbs, then, is to get us back in to the garden, back to life, back to Eden. And Proverbs does this by trying to teach us to listen to the voice of Lady Wisdom. And the primary way Proverbs seeks to tune our ears to wisdom's voice and open our eyes is with short, simple sayings that play out God's wisdom in everyday life, so that we can see in everyday things what God's ways look like. And what they look like is life. What they look like is vitality. What it looks like to be wise is to have joy, favor, and immortality. What it looks like to live with wisdom is to be back in the Garden of Eden. Which is why in Proverbs, Lady Wisdom is not just giving good advice. She is leading those who will listen to the tree of life. But alongside the way of life, found beside nearly every wise proverb line, we find the way to death also being described. She is called adulteress, forbidden, wayward, Lady Folly. Her speech is smoother than oil. Her lips drip with honey. She lures people away with her vain promises of pleasure, ease, and fame. But her path only and always leads to the grave. Just like what happened to Adam and Eve when they turned to the forbidden tree, anytime we try to define what is good and right in our own eyes, anytime we try to find pleasure in places God wisely denies, anytime we try to live contrary to what is wise, we take the forbidden fruit and swallow folly's lies. Anytime we try to find a way to live apart from God, we only find our own demise. And that is because we are trying to live apart from the tree of life, which is why we all die, because doing right is not our default position. We as humans don't naturally listen to the voice of Lady Wisdom. So when we meet her in Proverbs, she is not some quaint, quiet teacher. Instead, she's begging people to listen like some wild street preacher. Proverbs shows us a picture of Lady Wisdom crying loudly along our paths and in public squares, trying to snatch people before they fall into folly's snare. She says if anyone would turn to listen, she would pour her thoughts into them and they would know wisdom, but no one pays attention to this wise rhetorician. And so instead of pouring out wisdom, the foolish will get disaster and distress. Instead of receiving the tree of life, all who follow folly choose the path of death. But God's wisdom would triumph over folly, because wisdom would come in the flesh. Wisdom would move beyond the words and sayings of Proverbs to take on life and breath. Wisdom would be a human. The voice of God would be like us, so that we could encounter wisdom in the person of Jesus. Jesus is wisdom in the flesh. He is Proverbs made alive. He walked on actual paths and spoke in actual squares to show us the actual way to life. He walked the path of the wise, which no one else was able to tread. He refused the snares of folly by which everyone had been misled. He earned a way to the tree of life and a way out from the house of the dead. For by trusting in the life Jesus lived and the tree on which he died, we can escape the fruit of death and be fed by the final tree of life. We all approach this path. We all face this choice to follow the ease of Lady Folly or intently listen for wisdom's voice. But the difference now is that Jesus does what Proverbs said Lady Wisdom would do for those who listen to her counsel and for those who would hear it. Jesus comes to fools like us and pours his wisdom into us through his Spirit. Wisdom has come near us. What used to be a distant voice has now come inside. For the Spirit of wisdom by which Jesus lived, died, and was made alive is the same Spirit guiding those who trust Jesus down the path to the tree